A spectre is haunting Europe, the spectre of communism. The old powers of Europe have combined into a holy alliance to exorcise this spectre. The opening lines of the Communist Manifesto, written by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels in 1848. Hello and welcome to the Populi Podcast. I'm Jake Lambella and I'm joined by my fellow comrades,
Comrade Powell.
I'm Comrade Lee.
And this is our communism special. Today we are joined by esteemed academic, Hegelian and all-round communist,
Hello.
Dr. William Sharkey.
Thank you. I wasn't sure if your opening bit about the spectre haunting Europe was like a jibe about how pale I am.
No.
So thank you.
Do you want to begin with the definitions of communism?
Sure. So I suppose when you guys asked me to be on the podcast, it was initially framed as you wanted to talk to me about maybe what socialism or communism was.
Yeah.
And I've actually spent a long time thinking about what kind of things I could contribute to this discussion to be helpful. And I kind of confused myself a wee bit, if I'm being totally honest, because there's not a really clear definition of what communism or socialism is.
Yeah.
It's a fairly vague umbrella term, but I suppose if we're talking about a constitutive feature of what it is to be a socialist is someone who believes that the state in some way should control the means of production. So at the moment, the means of production are owned by private people. Socialists would argue that the means of production ought to be brought under state control. Socialists normally talk about managing economic scarcity. So there are finite resources in the world, there are finite resources in the world. How on earth do we go about producing these resources and distributing these resources? And socialists will normally give you an answer as to how this ought to be done, and they'll normally have a principle upon which this should be carried out. Communism is normally the end state of socialism. So when you read Marx or when you read Kropotkin or whomever you want to read, don't just read dead old white guys talking about communism. There's great modern communists. People I suppose Angela Davis or Asata Shakur or even Ash Sarkar, who's currently a journalist for Novara Media. A lot of communists will talk about managing a state of abundance. So what sort of distributive model should we have, or what sort of ownership model should we have if we in principle can produce a state of abundance? I don't know if that's a good enough place for you guys to start off on.
Yeah,
Definition. I don't know how we wanted to do this.
So,
Go on, Jack.
what made you what made you align with a communist way of thinking? I know you're a anarcho-socialist.
Yeah, sure.
But we'll stick that under the communist branch for now.
Yeah,
what made you gravitate towards that sect of thinking?
It's
that religion, even.
That religion, yeah. It's a really good question, I suppose. I think I became a communist roughly when I was around about your age. I probably wasn't as politically developed as you guys are when I was your age. Maybe a few years later. I used to read a lot. Specifically, I used to read a lot of Dostoevsky. Dostoevsky really hated socialists. And then I started reading a lot of Russian literature more generally. And I just kind of became interested in the Russian Revolution of all things. And then, of course, I went to the source. I went to Daddy Marx, I suppose. And Marx has got two parallel arguments for communism. One is negative, and one is positive. One is that you should reject capitalism for these reasons. The other is you should accept communism for these reasons. And I suppose being a fairly unsophisticated young person, I was really persuaded by his negative arguments. I thought, he seems to be, broadly speaking, correct, that the world is organised in relation to vested interests, and this seemed to be inherently unjust. So I suppose that's the kind of thing that made me was your question what argument specifically motivated me towards communism?
Probably a bit of both.
That's a really good question. I suppose I thought about maybe how things are distributed in society, and it seemed to me to be the case that wealthy people were becoming wealthier. Poor people seem to be becoming wealthier too, but at a slower rate than wealthier people. And because wealth, we tend to think of it as being a fairly fluid concept, and it tends to be relative to the society in which you live. It seemed to me absolutely absurd that in the fifth wealthiest economy in the world, there were homeless people, and that really troubled me. And I know people who have got lots and lots of homes who don't use them, and they're just purely there as economic assets when there are people outside who are starving. Another formative experience, and this is like really shameful, I apologise. I went to the Savoy Hotel in London of, like, again, a terrible communist. I went to the Savoy Hotel, and I was blind at the time, and I had my guide dog, the lovely Lily, her name is. And this waiter came over to me to like serve me at the Savoy Hotel, and he asked me if I would like some water for the dog, and of course I said yes because I'm a nice owner. And this dude brought out a solid silver bowl filled with mineral water for my dog to drink from. And I left the Savoy Hotel, and about a minute later I tripped over a homeless person. And I think that was like such a stark contrast to the opulence side. Like the fact that the Savoy Hotel were happier to treat my dog with more respect and reverence than the poor homeless did outside. I think that really struck me.
I wonder if we can talk about Britain, and because that's where Engels and Marx went. Kind of, there's the stories of Engels and Marx both working in the factories, managing Manchester factories during the week and fox hunting in the weekend.
Sure.
So they went to England and they found that like the plight of the poor to be a massive issue, and that kind of motivated them to write this. And they thought the revolution would happen in England,
Yeah,
or
that's right.
France, and Russia would be the place of the counter-revolution. So do you think what this may be a bit more history, but what do you think stopped the revolution happening in England as opposed to?
Oh, that's so like Marx has got this view called technological determinism, where he says that the technology operant in your society will determine the economic structure of your society. So I think the famous line is from, I'm going to get this wrong, and the people on YouTube are going to yell at me. I think it's from the German ideology. And he says, the handmill gives you the feudal serf, the steam mill gives you the industrial capitalist. So Marx has got this view that the more technologically advanced the society, the more intricate the mode of production is. The mode of production under which we live currently is capitalism. But Marx thought the technology that can be created by capitalist economics is kind of like producing abundance. Once you get to that stage, it'll all collapse and you'll get a communist society that emerges out of the tensions. So why did you want to pop in?
Yeah, so is that Karl Marx's idea of is it the materialistic dialectic?
Yeah, that would be
where
right.
It starts from the nature, from the commune in nature, and then people are oppressed into slaves through violence. Then the feuds and the serfs come along. Then comes out the lords and the kings and the Industrial Revolution. Then capitalism, and then it all crumbles down back into its natural state of communism.
Yeah, exactly, that's right. So like you've got like technology that's produced, it produces the economic system. The economic system produces more technology which undermines the economic system. So you get these internal tensions within all economic systems, and they lead to like evolution. Marx thought England would be a prime place for the revolution, because England had like the Industrial Revolution, which was like remarkably brilliant at like driving history forward, right? Like just fantastically good at doing so. Why didn't it happen? I don't have a good answer to that question.
I mean, it could be because obviously Marx is thinking, when we get to the state of abundance, it's going to happen. As communism is a natural step forward from abundance. So the issue may come from the fact that abundance is restricted, if you get what I mean. Like currently today, there's so many diamonds in the world, but they're restricted based on how many you want to let out every so often. If a company's a monopoly over a thing, they're able to restrict, if there's an actual abundance of it. Even if we could live in a state of abundance, it's more beneficial for a company that needs to make a profit at the end of the day, because its shareholders to limit the supply of things and to limit how often people can get hold of things. Apple doesn't release a budget phone, not because of the profits it produced, but because its brand image would decrease, and because of that its projected value go down. That's one of the reasons. In India right now, Apple's completely it's got a slither of a percentage of market share because it refuses to bring prices down.
That's all right. Oh.
Yeah, Apple's doing horrible in India, just can't crack the market because how the GDP per capita in India is so low, and the median average household income is so
They
low.
refuse to
Refuse to lower the prices. Right. The cheapest phones you can get in India is an iPhone 5 or 6, but no one wants the old phone. So everyone's trying to go for these budget phones that come from China and overseas. So even though Apple has enough money right now to lose a lot on giving people things that they really wanted to, and produce abundance. A lot of companies could also do the same. But if they're able to artificially stop said abundance, then it would stand to reason that because of that,
So this is what we call managed scarcity, right? It's like
Yeah.
when you have like lots of a thing, but then you deliberately restrict the flow of that thing into a marketplace. And this happens with like all sorts, like iPhone's like a really good, I didn't know this example about the iPhone, but I do know about oil, and this happens there.
Also, Karl Marx said that the abundance in capitalist society caused like economic crashes and massive economic shocks.
Boom and bust, yeah.
Yeah, the economic cycle. But we've already seen crashes like the 1929 crash, the
2008, yeah.
I'm on right
Yeah.
now.
The
2008,
current one.
and Black Monday. I wouldn't say the current one because that's more caused by a pandemic. I wouldn't say that's necessarily a cause of the capitalist
You could
system.
see the pandemic like kind of
Yeah.
highlights of the problems of the capitalist system with
Mhm.
like how many, which
Yeah,
ones.
but the abundance didn't cause it.
Sure.
Yeah.
But so if we've already seen these shocks, and we managed to get over these shocks, what is stopping us from continuing the dialectic to what Marx would say is the next phase of communism?
So can I just jump in? I don't know if you want to go back to the kind of why it didn't happen in England. I wonder, I think we're going to talk about Lenin a bit later, but if it didn't happen because there wasn't not a good group like the Bolsheviks, there wasn't enough of a charismatic leader like someone like Lenin or Trotsky in England to kind of oversee a good revolution.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds plausible to me, like if there's not been an architect of the revolution.
Yeah.
I wonder also, I read, and this is, I really hate reductive like arguments in history, but I read a book that suggested that the reason you didn't have a proper revolution in England was because of cricket. Because in cricket you've got working class people playing alongside upper class people. And it's one of the very few sports where this happens. And apparently because of this like humanization process, we didn't really have like a Republican movement, an aggressive Republican movement in England in the same way you did in France and all these other kind of old empires. That strikes me as like being implausible, but I wonder if like the English character is a bit more, you guys like don't like causing a fuss. Like I loved English dearly before YouTube blows up again, but you guys are not ones for a fuss.
Yeah. I wonder if we can talk a bit about Marx himself as a writer. So I noticed that he uses a lot of Gothic imagery. In
He's a
Definitions of
massive fan
Communism.
of sci-fi as well.
We've got like Spectre,
Yeah.
Exercise, Bloodsuckers, Parasites. So he
Vampires.
also is a massive praiser of the bourgeoisie. He thinks that like the adventure, what they've done, the achievements of them, kind of global reach, the relentlessness of it.
Yeah,
and
he's like
its
really,
potency.
he's really positive about capitalism a lot of the time. He thinks it's technology produces.
Is it because he sees the bourgeoisie having the seeds of its own destruction within it? Is that why he's so praising it? Because the more magnificent it gets, the larger the crumble will be. Kind of the grave digger, I think he uses.
It's a really interesting question. So he thinks like the bourgeoisie, by which he means something like the owners of the means of production are essentially parasites at this point. Similarly, he praises capitalism an awful lot for being very innovative as an economic structure. So Marx has got this like ambivalent attitude towards capitalism. Sometimes, especially in works like the Grundrisse, he will talk about how amazing capitalism has been at like improving the lives of some people, and he'll talk about the amazing way it's able to produce wealth and the amazing way it's able to produce products and goods and services that people need in order to function. And then in the next sentence, he'll talk about it in incredibly scathing tones about how it dehumanizes and impoverishes the working people, the people who actually create the wealth.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to get a sense of Marx's view on capitalists. I think it's a problem in Marx that he keeps using moralized language to describe people. When Marx was asked what would the moral structure of a post-capitalist society look like, he says, I don't know, because like their consciousness will be different from the consciousness we currently occupy. So it's not clear what evaluative system they would use. And yet he still like uses an evaluative system to kind of judge people in the past. Is this a cell phone? Probably not. Like he would just say I'm a product of my time. Using the moral language that I have, he wants to like criticize people. But it would be ridiculous for him to say capitalism's given us nothing and it's universally terrible.
Yeah.
That would be like, that would make him not a very intelligent or sophisticated thinker. But Marx is very, very good at using what would have been contemporary pop cultural references in his books. And I think this is really fantastic about Marx.
I do wonder this in Marx and like his reasons, like he's like, there's somehow like, it looks like he's like praising capitalism and also like, seeming like, has massive problems at the same time. it might be like, I think it's an issue of priorities, because the things you praise as a capitalist for are the things that someone who's like, would like a capitalist for is, the wealth creation, but his priorities don't lie in the creation of wealth. His priorities lie in the standard of living for the individual, and like making sure that as a society, social mobility is something available to everybody. So you probably can praise capitalism for some of its biggest achievements, but due to his own the priorities that he puts forward as the most important priorities. That's the way around he goes about things. Back onto quickly the English Revolution, or the one that never happened but could have happened.
One day. Is that incitement? Will I get arrested and fired for saying that?
I hope not.
A peaceful revolution.
Yeah, they happen, I'm sure. So.
Yeah.
A peaceful election.
Well, the same happens in England that's happening in Canada at the moment with YouTube.
Oh yeah, have you seen that?
I've not. Tell me about this.
In YouTube, do you want to?
It's C10, isn't it? Something like that.
Yeah.
It's
C7, right?
It's C7. One of the C's.
What are the numbers?
Just Trudeau's new law that kind of really is pushing pro-Canadian things on YouTube and other social medias, so much so that kind of some Canadian YouTubers can get put down if it's kind of anti-Canadian, and also they'll bring up other Canadians. Sometimes you won't get any people on your feed at all, which is kind of a real threat to free speech.
Yeah.
Well.
It seems like what they're trying to the language Trudeau I think uses is uplifts the national spirit, gives everyone can understand Canada's culture more openly.
I suppose someone else said that 100 years, about 90 years ago, a fellow in Germany.
I don't know if
The national spirit. I've never heard of it.
Yeah.
Definitely. On the possible revolution that we haven't had yet, but there's still time.
I'd cross my fingers.
Yeah, the thing is, like you said, English don't want to cause a fuss, and there's an issue that arises from the fact, you said, no competent leader to take the thing. If we don't have someone who can because at the end of the day, a lot of people aren't going to change their mind based on that's a very nuanced economic theory. They're going to think, oh, that's some good rhetoric that riles me up and makes me vote in. Because a lot of work is probably revolted in Russia because of a lot of them they've agreed with what's to say. A lot of them probably did the same thing based on this rhetoric of here's a demon that you can backstick at for your problems, that being bourgeoisie. And then Orwell has the vision in 1984 the guy with the top hat and he's running around beating children with sticks.
Yeah.
And that's the idea of the capitalist, and that's when
we've seen that video of Boris Johnson mentioning that kid playing, was it football or rugby?
Yeah.
Literally
Well,
a guy in the top hat.
I think if we can move on to the Russian Revolution now, I think the reason the Russian Revolution happened is because England and France are these two relatively rich industrial societies. Russia's in a massive agrarian peasant land with two main, Moscow and St. Petersburg, as their two main industrial cities. These people were living in poverty. I think it was more need and desperation coupled with the rhetoric of leaders.
the figure out of the
Yeah,
world.
Britain, people were mostly were fine. You had kind of around this time, kind of George Lloyd starting to build, Lloyd George, the Liberal Prime Minister, starting to build slums before coming out, trying to help the British population. And then we had the Liberal Party as well. Before then, you had the kind of the Tsarist Russia, which was really
placate.
Yeah.
So yeah, the Labour Party, a lot of Marxists consider it to be a safety valve of capitalism. A lot of communists like me would argue that the Labour Party is fundamentally the betrayers of the working class, especially Keir Starmer. I technically I'm not a teacher at the moment, right? So I could just slam Keir Starmer. I just cannot stand him. Absolutely cannot stand him.
Can you not do that when you're teaching? Just
officially no. Some of you guys are in my classes, and you'll know that I never express a political opinion in my class ever. So some people would consider that the Labour Party is actually a thing that's holding the revolution back. This is an accelerationist bent in some Marxism, I suppose.
I wonder if Lloyd George, kind of accommodating for the poverty in England, not by much, but at least accommodating for it. I wonder if that kind of comfort made people think, we don't really need a revolution.
Yeah,
We've seen
evolution
this.
over time as opposed to revolution quickly. Jack, you know.
On the idea of things stopping the revolution, I think I got this point kind of off George Orwell, that there always seems to be a thing going on in either the economy or society or geopolitically that stops people from thinking about it. So there's Brexit, get Brexit done. There's economic crashes that always occupies people's mind, so they can't focus on what's properly real. Do you reckon those distractions from the revolution, quote unquote, could really be playing into why the revolution hasn't happened yet.
I wonder if, I mean, that sounds plausible to me, because if you keep your population constantly distracted around these like population unifying events, then you're not going to see the state or the ruling class as an oppressive class. You're going to see yourself as continuous with them. And then when you were talking, I started thinking about, it's 100 years ago now since Ireland was unified. Not unified, my God, the opposite of unified, partition. But the Irish got their independence, or some of the Irish got their independence, Chucky or Lau, got their independence in 1921, right? But they had a Marxist revolution in 1916. They actually wrote to Lenin, James Connolly wrote to Lenin for advice on how to go about doing a revolution. And Lenin wrote back saying,
before that,
revolution. And Lenin wrote back saying, take over the post office first and foremost. If you cut the communications, you'll win. So if you go to the GPO today in Dublin, there's still bullet holes from the Irish Revolution, and it's now a museum for this, and it's smashing. But I wonder if, rather than having the proletariat in England, of which there are obviously members, most of the world see this country as the bourgeoisie.
Comfortable middle class.
Yeah, exactly, which just isn't true. In fact, even as a Scot, when I moved to England, the lie that's told to Scottish people is that all English people are wealthy, well educated. And we know this because your house prices are significantly more than they are in Scotland.
Then you went to Manchester.
And then I went to Hampshire, and I discovered that the house prices were astronomical, but the people were very poor in virtue of this. So it's just not true that English people are all universally wealthy in any way. What was the point I was going to make? Oh yeah, it was something about I think this idea of English people being the middle class is false. But you also have this operant thought that when the upper classes mock you, they're not mocking you, they're mocking other people. So when Boris Johnson's dad says working class people are all stupid and they can't spell Pinocchio, working class people hear that and they say, well, he's not talking about me. And I wonder if it's Marx would describe this as a false consciousness, or a lack of class consciousness, where English people seem particularly bad at identifying with the social class to which they belong. So you get these hordes of working class people all supporting the Queen. And it blows my mind that this is the case. There's so many class antagonisms between the ruling classes and the working classes in England that not you, but English people, some English people don't seem to see. And I wonder if that's what stops the revolution, is a lack of class consciousness.
Yeah, because it might be there's no spark, so to say, to first ignite people to think that way. Because a lot of people if when someone Boris Johnson's dad comes on and says something like that, everyone thinks, oh, they're not talking about me, they're talking about the person just one level down from me.
Yeah,
that's not me. It's the same with people in general just are very quick to if it's a joke, if someone's laughing at you, oh, they're laughing at me, that person next to me. People are very quick to join whatever the group seems to be, as to avoid being an outsider from something.
Yeah, no one wants to feel bad about themselves, right?
Yeah. So you don't want to feel as though a lot of people don't want to be quote unquote have a persecution complex. People if you get what I mean, they don't want to act. If say a bunch of people, someone was having these movements, people well, you're not persecuted, you've got it fine. You're this is where you've got a job and a house. And,
you're not on the bottom rung.
Yeah, and it's kind of because of that, people are probably less likely to. For those who watched the Populi Podcast episode on the Queen featuring Archibald Elliott from the Populi Podcast, you can understand our views on the rules more succinctly. But for now, I'm pretty sure most of us are in agreement. It doesn't seem to help anything as much as it does, cause a disparity between the ruling class and the working class, and a wealth divide, so on, so forth.
Oh, now hold on, Tom. It does have coherency.
There's a golden thread running through society.
I think it's time to have a break. After the break, we're going to be talking a bit about the Russian Revolution and the USSR and how it played out communism around the world and in the modern day. Hello and welcome back to the Populi Podcast and our communism special. We're going to talk a bit about the Russian Revolution and communism actually playing out, or communism actually playing out in real life. So we had the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks were a bit more aggressive, and we had people like Trotsky and Lenin within the Bolsheviks. And I didn't know this, I don't know if you know this, but Trotsky was kind of ousted as leader in place of Lenin, because everyone thought that Trotsky was a bit too much like Napoleon, and he had turned out to be like Napoleon. Okay. And so Lenin believed kind of he did the revolution and he saw violence and kind of dictatorship, kind of authoritarian rule over Russia. So I guess, and he also had a bit of elitism in there that Marx didn't have, the idea that you would have a controlling elite.
Yeah, like the vanguard party.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
So I guess the question I have, we're going to talk about Stalin later, is Marxism or communism innately violent?
Innately violent.
Yeah.
Ooh.
So I've got like views on this, so I'll try and be careful. No, I don't think it is innately violent. I think it's innately peaceful. However, I do think the revolution will probably be violent.
The revolution.
Well, I guess it has to be violent because people aren't just going to go, oh yeah, take my third home.
Well, exactly right. So like this is what annoyed me about Jeremy Corbyn's leadership is Corbyn kept on talking about renationalising services and industries.
Yeah.
And I do not imagine you could just go up to like the head of Hewlett Packard or the head of Intel or the head of Apple and say, dear sir, we've had a vote, we've decided we'd like your things, we're going to like bring them under state control, and thank you very much in advance. They're just not going to relinquish their power.
Is it justified to like begin this like revolution if it's inherently going to be violent?
I would say that capitalism is in essence violence against the people.
Right.
Therefore, it's not really an aggressive act as much as a self-defensive act.
Right,
So
right.
like I generally abhor violence, but I can't see it happening any other way. Is communism inherently violent? Well, no. I think it's violent to dehumanize people, which I think capitalism in its essence does. What does communism do other than say that workers should control the means of production? It doesn't say how things should be distributed initially. And this is why it really annoys me when I hear some teachers spreading anti-communist propaganda that communists believe that everyone should get the same thing. Like, well, what would I do with a pram? Like, I don't have kids, I don't want kids. Why would I get a pram? So is communism inherently violent? No. I think it inherently humanizes people. I think it has acted badly in the past. And that's like, I'm happy to concede that. I'm not a tanky.
Yeah. So go badly. I mean, you can't not talk about the USSR and communism without mentioning Joseph Stalin, the Russian dictator. So I don't know if you've read Stephen Kotkin. He's done a massive kind of biography of Stalin's life.
I've not, but like
kind of
I think
volumes. This is massive. Sorry. And he said, so there's two views in Stalin, that he got his hands Marx's experiment and he got it all wrong and he killed all these people. And then there's Stephen Kotkin's view, which is that he wasn't a madman or a sadist, and he's actually a very good Marxist. As a student, he immersed himself in Marx. He wrote lots for journals and articles about Marxism. And the reason he killed all these people is because he believed it was the best way to achieve paradise. And we
like
kind
a utilitarian view, you mean?
Yeah, we kind of see that through kind of Mao and Hitler. That they do these things because they think it's wrong, and as we think that.
I enjoyed that contrast between Mao and Hitler. Thank you.
Yeah,
it's good.
Just people who've murderous,
like
maniacs.
Raging psychopaths.
So we think that that's stupid, that killing millions of people isn't going to bring a paradise around, but they think so. Stalin,
So Stalin, I would maybe put pressure on this idea that Stalin was a good communist, purely because Stalin brought things under state control, not worker control. For a start, so like, and I don't think it was ever his ambition to bring things under worker control. Communism is inherently democratic as well. Like people say, like communism is totalitarian, and I understand why they would make this claim, because like anytime communism has been appropriated by people, it has become totalitarian. It'd be ridiculous to say otherwise. But communism aims to give workers democratic voting rights inside their workplace and all this kind of stuff. There is none of the kind of trademark features of communism within Stalinist Russia. I thought, and I probably am wrong, but I thought Stalin was considered like the village idiot of the Communist Party before.
He might be an immersed, he might have been immersed, but still an idiot. Because
Right.
didn't anyone was really opposed to giving it to Stalin?
Yeah, so like the reason, as far as I know, the reason Stalin became the leader of the Communist Party was because he told Trotsky that Lenin's funeral was after when it actually was, to make Trotsky look bad in the eyes of the Communist Party. I think that's true.
So what did he say?
So like, everyone's burying Lenin. Lenin was kind of fairly revered in this society.
He's still there.
Yeah, and Trotsky writes to Stalin and says, "Dear Stalin, when is Lenin's funeral? I want to come back and like pay my respects."
Where was it?
I think it was in Switzerland or something. I'm not sure. So Stalin says, "Oh, it's next Tuesday," but actually it was on the Monday or whatever. So like everyone sees Trotsky, or everyone notes that Trotsky's not there. And Stalin's like, that Trotsky, very disrespectful. And he apparently used this to leverage his way into the main seat. Was Stalin interested in improving the lives of the Russian people? Probably. I mean, Russia did like advance technologically enormously during Stalin's time. They also offered a lot of scholarships to African Americans to study at university. And they had this like global emancipatory project, it seems to me. Was he a murderous tyrant? Yeah, of course he was.
And more Russians prefer Stalin over Gorbachev as well.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Oh. I don't know if that's like Stockholm syndrome, perhaps.
Well, I think a lot of people hate Gorbachev because he kind of
Yeah.
ended the Soviet Union terribly.
I mean, imagine going through all of that to have someone throw it away.
And
when you think
so badly.
and so badly as well.
Selling industries off for kind of toughness.
Yeah. So talking about contributors to the Marxist socialist theory, how much of your own ideology would you take from the works of Max Stirner? Because as I understand, Max Stirner was quite pivotal in the role of anarchism and more communism for the individual rather than as for the whole.
Sure. So I'm not a huge fan of Max Stirner because I think he's got the view that what matters most is like the unitary individual, where in virtue of my own Hegelianism, I think that people are essentially intersubjective. So I don't think you are free and an individual unless you are recognized as free as an individual. I think you have a deficient concept of self unless you live in a society and you have like your identity play out and validated or rejected by other people to work out what works for you or what doesn't work for you. If I think I'm a genius chess player and I play only bad chess players, then this isn't going to be good for me, right? I need to play other peers to have my idea of myself either confirmed or denied. So like Max Stirner seems to like reject this view, and he seems to think that what matters most is the individual against society rather than the individual as being formed by and recognized by and recognizing society. So I think I'd probably not be a big fan of Max Stirner.
Then what made you yourself an anarchist, if not the individualism of Max Stirner?
So I am a communist anarchist, I suppose, and my biggest influence was probably a person called Peter Kropotkin, who wrote the Big Bread book, the kind of famous like Conquest of Bread. That was Kropotkin, yeah, definitely. Actually, the reason I became an anarchist initially was like reading far too much Aristotle. So Aristotle's got this idea about what it was to be a virtuous person. And it seems to be the case that virtuous people don't need the law to tell them what to do. Bad people won't follow the law anyway, so why do you bother having the law? What the law does is suggest that moral rules are external to the agent. And this, like, to my mind at least, would hamper moral maturity in an agent. So I would say that the state's a bad thing, because it mislocates the nature of your obligations and duties. So like I became an anarchist because I read a lot of Aristotle.
So final question.
Final question of the day.
No. Final question in this
Mastermind.
String of questions is so in your anarchist society, morals. Good people do morals. Well, good people are good people. They do good things. There's no need for laws, because good people don't need laws to tell them what to do, and bad people are bad people regardless of the law. Is there a place for toleration in this society?
So like I maybe want to clarify what I mean by the law in this aspect, right? So like I don't think it's the state's job to impose from the top down a series of laws onto a community, but that's not to say that I don't agree with codes of conduct and things like this. So anarchism is the belief that the state is an oppressive institution. It's not the belief that we shouldn't have rules. I mean, I'm a driver, which maybe some of you guys are drivers, I don't know. But if everyone was just to decide to drive on whichever side of the road they wanted, this would be a recipe for disaster. So anarchists believe in rules, they just don't believe in rulers.
Right, so in that case, what do
You're
you
kind of going into
force?
anarchism a bit here from...
Well,
It's all under the same umbrella.
Yeah, sure.
We need to do another anarchism special.
Anarchist special.
So with these rules that have
With it burning
being put
down
in
the
place, who
platform.
enforces them? Like, is that just like on the community as a whole to like each like take up to make sure rules?
Yeah, so like the rules would have to be considered good by the participants in the community.
Right, I see.
And then you could have like federated states, I suppose.
Yeah,
or like,
yeah.
not states, importantly, but you could have like federated institutions.
So you'd want everything based more like on an individual delocalized.
Yeah, like on a smaller scale.
Right. I wasn't wondering if maybe you guys agree, and I'm sure this might come across as very insulting. Are your views a little bit like idealist or anything else on the idea of like, because while you can talk about the idea of this like anarchist state or this communist state both being really good in like theory and would be like, it obviously in practice I'm not trying to
Sure.
I'm not for a second.
Oh, please don't worry.
Isn't that through the view of kind of our capitalist society at the moment?
Yeah, but the problem being we have to look through things through the view of the society we're in at the moment, and if you want to shift societies, it would be through like a quote unquote revolution, which could lead to more violence and problems in the streets.
So is your question, is my anarchism naive and ideological?
Well, the anarchism and communism being that while they're good ideas, and if they were to be implemented like overnight, if like we woke up one day and that was the state of the world, that might be good. But if we have to get to that state of the world, and it seems to be the only way is through like violence, then or like so for like the dismantling of the entire system that everyone lives in. And I know Marx says obviously that our mindsets are like built by the society around us.
Sure.
Our minds, we can't help but look at each other as like competitors for the same resource because we capitalist society. So yes, well, one of good Marx saying that and saying that's what we think the things they do, but we still think them, and that's not going to change overnight.
Yeah, how do you change your consciousness, right?
Yeah, the problem as I see with these views more than anything else is like not the practice or what they do, is how do we get to them? I don't see a road.
Yeah, sure, that's a really good question. So firstly, I suppose that the opening question being something like communism and anarchism are good in theory, but they don't seem to work in practice because there's a time lag between the system changing and consciousness changing. Is that right?
That, and the only people who would want to put them in practice tend to be people who want to do it for their own gain.
Sure.
And from that, we lead to bastardized versions of these things that aren't a true version, but that
Or
seems
Max
to be
Stirner.
Or Max Stirner. So I suppose what I'd say to that is weirdly, anarchism doesn't really work in theory. Like anarchist theory is actually incredibly bad. Marx has got a really solid theoretical base. But in the anarchist school, the theory tends to be really patchy because they all disagree with each other, right? There's no like coherent, by its nature, there's no coherent anarchism. Unlike in Marxism, which Marx isn't really communist, but like Marxism is a very solid mechanism by which to codify how things should work. Anarchism doesn't work really in theory. It does work in practice. It's one of the few things that bizarrely does work in practice. And if you want evidence of this, I suppose I can give you a few cases. The first is like the anarchist communes in the Spanish Civil War worked really effectively. The second is there's a car park in Glasgow that was completely unregulated. There were always parking spaces and people always treated each other's cars very respectfully because there was unwritten, kind of socially agreed upon rules. The third is, for your listeners who don't know, there is an area just outside Turkey called Rojava. I wonder if that bell will be heard.
yeah, very loud.
That's grand. There's an area just outside Turkey called Rojava, which is populated almost entirely by Kurds, that is organised and run in accordance with anarchist principles. They have resisted the hostility of the Turkish state for like, I don't know how long now, God knows how long. But everyone's well fed, everyone's very well educated, the women enjoy parity with the men, and everyone seems to be getting on, and there's no state.
What do you think, Mike?
What's the country in Africa that there was that one guy who like vaccinated millions of children and he was a communist leader.
Oh, it's not Ankara.
Angora.
I'm trying to think of the leader's name. It's not, I know the one you mean.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. But yeah,
And he was
the Black Panthers were an anarchist group as well, right?
Do you think this anarchism, because you describe relatively small countries, do you think it has any kind of weight depending on the size of the?
Like, how do we get from there?
How do we scale up?
No, I just think it is plausible in a larger society. Because these are
Yeah,
quite microcosmic ideas.
I suppose it would.
Not in Russia.
I suppose so communism is one of these things that either works totally or it doesn't work, right? So if you've got a communist state like Cuba next to a capitalist state like America, and America are going to treat Cuba with a fair amount of hostility.
Nothing's ever happened there.
No, I mean, purely hypothetical, right? It's going to be hard for a communist country to resist a capitalist aggression.
Yeah.
So if one country is communist, I think all countries are probably going to have to be communist in order for it to function. Anarchism is all about decentralizing power. So you wouldn't really have the nation state anymore. So it's not like, could America be an anarchist country?
Yeah.
I think America would just dissolve.
You'd have to make America dissolve to do that. And
Exactly.
that's the issue.
Yeah.
I think.
I mean, yeah, like I'm happy to concede this.
Yeah, that's like, so I feel like, and it's all like, again, like saying, you know, for communism, you need to work totally. How do you get the people, the leaders of states to give up their power and to the people who are in like that?
Surely.
Yeah, but that's really violent and people
But
die.
that's the way it works with kind of Lenin.
But it didn't work, did it? That's
But it
what
kind of
we
works.
found.
It did for 80 years.
I mean, it kind of works the other way as well. So, like, we now have technology that can produce infinite amounts of things. For example, like digital reproduction. So, if you're watching on YouTube, there's nothing to stop you downloading the video and sharing it an infinite amount of times.
Please do.
At literally,
Yeah.
please do. Literally zero cost. And the same's true for music. The same's true for like videos and all this kind of stuff. Anything that can be digitally produced can be digitally reproduced infinite amount of times at literally zero cost. So why are we paying Spotify? Why are we paying YouTube Premium? Do you get demonetized? Is that a thing? Why are we paying for
Yeah,
Netflix
yeah,
or
monetized,
any of these things? There's no need for it. The reason Netflix came about was because the industry was extremely concerned with piracy, and they thought maybe a way to offset piracy was instead of charging the person 15 quid per DVD, charge them £7 or £8 for access to all of it, and then you essentially rent the person their DVD over and over again. And the industry had no option but to take this deal. And people were like, well, I'm too lazy to pirate things. I'll just pay this £8. So now you've got like this enormous cost before, like how many DVDs are on, or how many films are on Netflix, right? Like thousands. This would cost you millions of pounds. Now you've got it for £8, and that price Netflix keep putting the price up. But the more competition or whatever emerges, the more Netflix will have to suppress their prices eventually. They can't keep on putting their prices up, or people will just turn back to piracy and it'll all crumble. So if you've got like this abundant state, and you've got the capacity for people to access these material goods for basically free, Google's free, YouTube's free, all these things are free. At what point does it make sense to not nationalize these industries? And like, we can just go up to Mark Zuckerberg and say, I want Facebook.
No.
If they, like, no one wants Facebook, right?
Yeah.
But like, there comes a point where the state just can step in and just say, we're taking this, there's nothing you can do. And there's nothing they can do.
I mean, there's something to do, surely, because they're in such high positions where, like, because the state isn't this entity that works in favour of the people all the time. It's a state full of corrupt people.
Sure, right. So like, this is why I'm an anarchist. But the state can do things like stop funding public research that gives Google their software and things.
But they probably won't.
They probably won't, because they're all in cahoots, right? But I suppose like that's up to you guys. Like as voters, you might vote for someone that will do something. I mean, I don't believe that for a second, but like.
Well, I think the argument that everyone, do you know Daniel Hannan?
I do know Dan
He's a
Hannan.
telegraph journalist.
Yeah.
He was part of an Oxford Union debate on socialism doesn't work, kind of discussing it. Jeremy Corbyn, the leader, the British Communist Party, and then they had these kind of well-known right figures like Daniel Hannan, and his argument kind of belittled the whole subject, and he said, well, it's never worked properly, so that was his excuse, that it's never worked.
Sure.
What was your kind of argument for that? Kind of the Soviet Union failed because of corruption, kind of Cuba, China's hardly, they say the communists.
They're not communists, obviously. So like,
is it an ideal state that they'll never get to?
that's really interesting. So Dan Harmon's Hannan's claim is that communism's never worked, therefore it will never work. So like what I'd say is like, firstly you need the infrastructure to be at a sufficiently developed level in order for it to work. Did Russia have that level? Obviously not. The second thing I'd say is, if you're just taking communist institutions to be those that are run and controlled by either workers or the state, I hate to like burst the bubble of like, or the veneer of highbrowedness in your podcast, but we're in a state school right now. You did not pay to attend here. I'm so sorry.
Answer the podcast,
The odds are you've also been born in the NHS, which is a socialist institution. So like the most well-run and beloved, by the way, institutions in this country, state education and state health, are socialised. So if it doesn't work, how come it works?
Yeah, that's kind of that was the excuse that the leader considered.
Excuse.
Yeah. He said, well, you can't look at Russia because Russia not only was it kind of a massive state, but when the revolution happened, it was in the middle of a massive world war, and all the other countries around it kind of send their armies in to tackle all of this. And then he also said that Jeremy Corbyn made the argument that the most well-loved institution in the UK is socialist, kind of the infrastructure that we pride ourselves on regarding kind of
Yeah,
It
that's
took,
great.
it took a World War to get that. It took 2 World Wars to get that, and that's the issue. You know, so nothing did that after 1945.
Beveridge report. Sir William Beveridge and his report, and Clement Attlee's integration, or who was the guy who stormed out because they raised the prices of prescriptions?
Churchill.
No. He was the health minister under Clement Attlee.
No clue.
God, I don't remember his name, but he was a major proponent of it. And 10 years later, I think the Conservative government was saying, look, we need to rein down costs. We're gonna make a £5 cost for specs, a £5 cost for braces, and raise the cost of prescriptions by £1.50. Now he quit politics because of that, because the NHS was his child, and he didn't want it bastardised.
And we see that now with the
Yeah.
Cameron premiership. We've got kind of all manners of parts of the NHS slowly being privatised.
Actually, to Labour Party's shame, that was Tony Blair that started that process.
Yeah, and then we Cameron.
He's
Yeah.
not a Labour
Tony
politician, he's
Blair.
Tony
No,
Ugh.
He's like Australian on this podcast. Must not be mentioned.
I'm bleeping you again.
yeah, so I suppose like if the kind of concern is that communism's never worked, I would just maybe say, well, we've got these like state socialised institutions that seem to work incredibly well. Not only that, but I would also say that the fact that people revere them so highly would suggest to me that people do seem to be, or have like a socialist tendency in them. They seem to value things like everyone getting a fair chance. They seem to value things like our young people being well educated and cared for. They do seem to think that there should be a safety net to look after the most vulnerable people in our society. I'm massively privileged in lots of ways, and it's not fair that I've had to work less hard than my partner Lizzie, who didn't have my kind of upbringing, and she's had to work a lot harder to get to essentially the same place. And that's not fair. And I think most people would agree with that. Most people would like, who you're born shouldn't determine who you die.
Yeah.
You should be able to live a life you yourself consider good.
Egalitarian kind of principle.
And we should like, we've got the means to do that as well in this country. We do have the means to like ensure that everyone can enjoy a basic standard of living.
But for that to happen, some might argue that we don't need a revolution. We just need a party like Clement Attlee's that kind of are more, still like maybe Labour, but are still, there's no workers controlling with the reduction. It's just far more kind of comfortable.
I mean, I think I'd be really sympathetic to this view, but that doesn't tend to be the trend that's been going down. When we look about, I mean, what do people need to live a life that they would themselves consider good? Well, they need a good education, and I would actually argue in England you do get that, broadly speaking. You probably need a house. Well, not everyone can afford a house. Landlords exist, and they're essentially social parasites. The state could provide housing. Sorry, Jack. The state could provide housing. But Margaret Thatcher sold it all off in the 80s.
Yeah.
And now there's no social housing for anyone. We talk about affordable housing, which is hundreds of thousands of pounds. And people your age probably won't have a couple hundred grand.
And people taking advantage of the system is another thing that annoys a lot of taxpayers. Of people, and it's a very small amount. I think it's Cameron's kind of divide and conquer strategy of saying, look at this person.
Look at these benefit scroungers, aren't they terrible?
And there's only like 2% of people who are like this.
I think it's six times more people are done for benefit scrounging than done for tax fraud. And there's probably a lot more people committing tax fraud than there are benefit scrounging.
Yeah, that's kind of.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's the
correct.
kind
Yeah,
of.
definitely.
It's that kind of like. Yeah, the parallel between like
Yeah.
wealth and like
Mhm.
likely to
People
cover.
people seem to like nudge off criticisms of the rich because they want to be rich, and when they want to be rich, they want to keep being rich. So they'll keep this like opium dream in their head whilst they're slaving away at a machine or at a cashier or in Mackie D's.
Yeah.
Do you think the American dream in that way is inherently like just there to placate people as opposed to anything else?
That's what Fitzgerald
What the
says.
idea of like meritocracy?
Yeah, do you think?
If you work hard, you'll get to where you need to be. I mean,
Well,
like,
Do you think
I
so, like,
wonder if we could pop in at this meritocracy bit, because meritocracy itself is elitist. It favours people who went to private school and got a better education. If you look at solely in the principle like academia,
sure.
if you say like a university at Oxford, say like, oh, we're only looking for the best, and technically that's meritocratic if you just say that, like, we're just looking for the best people regardless. But the best people tend to be people who afford private
It depends how you
education.
define the best, right?
Tutors.
So,
The people with the kind of usually the
Nice
vast
schools.
majority of people with the better academic intelligence are people who went to private schools, got the tutors, had good teachers, and like lived like boarding schools.
sure, they had like massive
So
material
by
support.
definition, meritocracy is elitist because it favours those people who got a better education
Only-
because of their wealth.
So to spot in, but only meritocracy in a capitalist state, where it is the case that people's like education is involved based on their monetary wealth. If you have meritocracy in a state where like education is like applied equally among all people,
Yeah.
then it would no longer be elitist as much as it favours those who work harder, which which is what we want from meritocracy, but it isn't what we're going to get in the current system. So like paraphrase Karl Marx, is meritocracy the opium of the people? If was Marx who said that right, I haven't just made a massive mistake.
No,
Yeah.
Marx did say that.
It's like
religion
an
was
yeah,
in
yeah.
the context
yeah.
of like everyone always.
Yeah, like fixes on the small part. So like Marx, like when he's talking about religion, doesn't think it's a bad thing. He just thinks it's not a good thing.
Spoken is saying that Marxism is based on religion. There's a
So
massive-
Marx was really influenced by a guy called Feuerbach. Feuerbach argued that people would attribute their goodness to God and away from themselves. Whereas Marx was like, this is what the state does. Like we kind of like tend to like serve the economy rather than letting the economy serve us. So Marx was really clued up in his philosophy of religion.
Yeah.
Fair play to him.
Because he was from Jewish descent.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Christian, yeah.
Yeah, kind of grim. What was the question? I'm so sorry, I forgot the question.
As well.
Was communism based on religion? So like religious values of care after your neighbour, and that can also lead on to what's your opinion on liberation theology?
Yeah,
Also-
Jesus.
Also, can we think of like St. Thomas Aquinas
Yeah.
as kind of the first communist kind of?
I mean, you can argue that Jesus was in lots of ways. There's like various passages in the Bible where Jesus A condemns the wealthy, and B I think it's in the Gospel of Luke, where he says everyone shared all things in abundance and they lived together in peace.
And you've got the kind of the camel eye.
Yeah.
Yeah, that whole thing. Some rich dude goes up to Jesus and says, "What should I do?" And Jesus says, "Sell your stuff," which is fine, right? Which is great. The book of James, there's a line in it that says something like, "You call the thief the man who steals a coat, but the real thief is the man that has two and doesn't give his brother one." So there's like lots of like lefty sentiments in the Bible. Jesus himself seems to be a pretty tolerant guy. He seems to humanize people fairly well. And
Jesus' last words at the last dinner. Do you know what's really good? Have free markets.
yeah, I've sorted it all out, lads. Here's what we're gonna do: free market economics.
I'm gonna make
I
free
think Adam Smith was the third coming of Jesus Christ.
The third coming. Who would be the second?
Who's the second? No,
That guy
Are you
from
just-
China.
no.
That guy from
What,
China.
Confucius?
No,
Joseph
no,
Smith.
no, no.
Joseph Smith, the Mormon prophet.
No. There was a guy from China around World War One who led the bloodiest revolution in history because he claimed he was
I
directly
think Adam
related
Smith was
to
alive
Jesus.
before World War One. So this
Yes.
is the guy
So,
third.
I mean, God doesn't see things time
Yeah.
on a scale forward.
Sure.
This is
Okay.
everywhere.
Time is a concept. Good.
Okay.
Right.
We're kind of distracting a bit.
Yes.
Do we want to kind of talk about socialism or any other communism?
Or we could talk about, sir, what is your ideal society and how would we realistically get there?
What a question to end with.
So I suppose my ideal society is one in which people have the means to live a life they themselves consider good. So for me, in my mode of being in the world, the thing I really want is a good stereo system, so I can play my jazz albums very loudly. Pretty much unlimited supply of high quality coffee. I want loads of books.
Complete catalogue of James Hoffman.
The complete catalogue of James Hoffman videos. Shout out to my man James.
He won't be watching.
He will not be watching this. I'll tag it. What else do I want? I'd want like maybe access to loads of books. I want my partner Lizzie to be able to like participate in a life she wants to like live. She's a utilitarian, so like she values all the wrong things, including me. And I want my guinea pigs to be happy and my cat to be happy, right? So like that's what I want for me.
personal basis.
How do I get there? Is the question, right? So like how I would get there is by coming into work at 6:45 in the morning, leaving at 5 o'clock in the evening, and hoping someone notices and pays me well. I'm very lucky in that I am paid fairly well by the school, and shout out to Mr. Williams. But I am. He will also not be watching this.
We'll tag him as well.
He will like, oh, that Sharky's getting fired.
Anarchist, eh?
But yeah, no, right. Keen in politics as well, you'll know. So yeah, Mr. Williams' degrees in politics.
What does history?
In Cambridge, or so, isn't he?
He went. I think he was.
It's like
Oxford
sociology
for a while.
Something weird.
Yeah, we don't want to be called the head teacher.
Yeah,
we
we
don't want to be
degrees,
called the
though.
man who has power over the beard.
No, degrees.
So how do we get there? I suppose like the way we can make sure that everyone gets there is by ensuring that people have got enough, not more. So as a society, we're overproductive. I suppose we get there by nationalising infrastructure. Like as a start, we'd start by nationalising infrastructure. We'd start allowing the workers who create wealth to control that wealth. I think that, again, that to me just sounds fair. If these people are creating the wealth, they should get to decide what happens in and to it. How do we get there practically? I've got two solutions. The first is we have a universal basic income, which is not very popular on the left all the time, mostly because I think it's been poorly communicated. The second thing we do is we start reducing the working week. Initially to 4 days, then to 3, then to 2, then to 0.
I mean, Henry Ford did a
Big fan of that.
working week by like around this kind of period to be on like 3 days, didn't he?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean Keynes, who's not a communist, thought it'd be about 3 hours a day.
How would you money? Because Marx argued that there'd be kind of no money.
Money's just a means of exchange, right? So
Yeah.
like, if there's a state of abundance, why would you need
Precisely. So
a state of exchange?
it's a sort of the.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So like, this is
Is
all
that
we-
day 5 when he goes?
Monday, yeah, on the 5th day. Yeah, back to our
So,
religious
uh,
analogies.
We'll end that.
So, say my design is to be really wealthy, be rich, and have everything in the world, every resource in the world.
Oh,
How
my.
would your theory placate my being in the world?
Do you mean, wait, I'm confused as to like what mode of being you occupy currently. So are you like a wealthy person amongst the state where other people are not wealthy?
I am in your society.
Mm.
My wish is to live extremely wealthy, specifically so that I have every single resource in the world.
Possible.
And if your theory is that you want people to live how they want, or have the means to live how they
Mm.
want to live, then surely I should have the means to get every single
You
resource
can
in the
impede other
world.
people's though, is the problem.
So good. So like, I suppose there are two things. Firstly, if the way you wanted to engage with the world was to privatize a bunch of resources, then I would say that that mode of being wasn't a legitimate mode of being, because I would argue something about your consciousness and failing to recognize the inherent dignity of other people, and also I'd say that it would be a bad mode of self-consciousness because you've misunderstood the kind of thing you are in virtue of wanting to do this to other people, right? If your mode of being was to like live a life of opulence and all that kind of jazz, then you know that's good, that's great for you. You can't own infinity, is the
I could
idea.
try, so.
You could certainly try, but it's going to be very hard for you to put a fence around infinity.
Simple,
So, yeah,
sir.
maybe.
A infinitely long fence.
Pardon?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. Solved. You're going to own them. You're going to own all the fences.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Alright, is that going to be us for today's episode?
Yeah. Okay. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Join us next week where we'll be interviewing again another guest, Morgan Stinchcombe, on a well-known polymath and a celebrity.
A very smart bloke,
A
an
celebrity.
extremely smart bloke,
About-
a scarily smart bloke.
Jack, about ecoism. So join us next week. Goodbye.